we go. Excellent. Okay, guys, well, welcome to our last session together. How time flies when you're having fun. And we're going to be looking at spatial orientation tonight. But as always, let's have a bit of a check-in. And it would be nice towards the end of this session if we can spend, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes just reflecting on what you might have taken from this 6 months and how, if any, which way it might have shaped your yoga teaching a little bit. So we can look at that at the end of the session. And I'm assuming there may be some more people online as well, so we can have a discussion. But would be nice to get a check-in on how you're traveling, how you're going with COVID, anything that's coming up in your work that's relevant to some of the stuff we've been exploring so far. That might be a good place to start. Who'd like to go first? We've got Roxy drinking some green slime over down there, and I ground up cane toads with a sprig of wheatgrass. Would you like to go first?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
With my yoga up here, I have started back at the studio, teaching at the studio, but I may stop depending on how it goes in Brisbane, because some cases of COVID-19 have maybe community transmission, so we'll see how it goes. But it has been nice to see students again, and people have been stressed, coming to yoga, and just appreciating being able to land on the mat. And in terms of how this course has influenced my teaching, I think it's just being more aware. Everyone has history that they carry in their body, and you just never know what someone's been through, but it's not my place to ask or to pry or anything like that, but more about respecting the space, and also empowering students to go where they want to go, rather than do this, you must do that. And so that's been really good.
Okay, and something I thought came to me, Roxy, as you were talking about the COVID, you can go on to the Queensland Department of Health website. If you just Google COVID-19 hotspots Queensland, and it'll take you to a site which shows you if and where there are any current hotspots throughout all of Queensland. And if there's a hotspot, then that is an issue around whether, so if you're near a hotspot, or if you've got someone coming to your class from a hotspot. And also on that website, they've got some really great material and signage that you can print off to put around the studio. I checked this afternoon because we've got a trauma sensitive training in Brizzy this weekend, so I'm just trying to keep on top of what's happening. And at the moment, there's no hotspots in Brisbane. There's been a couple of localized breakouts, but they haven't been deemed a hotspot as yet. So where are your classes running, Roxy?
At Chermside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're not sure, then that's actually a useful site to check in on. And as I said, it's also got some
yoga website. Did you say?
No. So it's the Queensland Department of Health. So if I remember tomorrow when I send out the recording, I'll put the links on to the recording about those links to that website. And also Australian Workplace and Safety have a whole lot of downloadable PDFs that you can print off that talk about social distancing and washing hands. And so your studio you're already running classes in may have already done that, but it's a requirement of the business to put that sort of stuff up.
The COVID safety plan.
Yeah, and the signage and how to wash hands and all that sort of stuff, and having sign-in sheets so that if people are coming to your class, they're signing in, they sign out, so that you've got contact tracing, and you have to hold that for 56 days for each class. So it might be
Yes.
worthwhile to familiarize yourself with, what's required, so that, you're just covering your bases.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'll do
beautiful.
that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Roxy. Welcome, Valerie. We're just checking in. That's okay. You keep eating and munching. Don't need to speak at the moment. No, keep going. Sandra's going to check in and then we'll come to you. So just relax.
Hi, I'm good. It feels very normal here in New Zealand now. It feels like we don't even have this thing called COVID until you drive past one of the hotels and you see all the big fences and security guards outside them. So it's kind of strange. And I've just had a week in a camper van traveling around the country in a cheap camper van, which has been just fabulous. And it was like, oh my God, if someone said to me, I want you to tell me everywhere you've been in the last week, I would have just struggled to
Yeah.
write it down. And so, yeah, because we don't have any good apps where you can write everything. No one's asking where you've been or to sign in anywhere. It's really interesting. And so we've started back, our studios are all back to normal. And yet I went to one of just a city class this morning at 6:30 that I used to do kind of religiously, and they're only half full.
Isn't that interesting?
And people have changed their patterns. People haven't returned to rushing. There's this whole thing around not returning to the rush. So it's really interesting. So I was quite surprised because that's the first time I've kind of been back for a while. And so we're back teaching our trauma sensitive yoga both online and in face-to-face, and doing both at the same time, really feeling into that difference of the resonance and
Yes,
and so it's really interesting doing both at the same time, having the experience of each. It's actually really good.
Yeah, no, it's great because it's very different. Each
Yeah.
one is very different.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It's me.
So do you thinking that some of those people that aren't coming to the morning are doing online classes instead, or they're just not opting to come
Apparently
into the
I was
studio?
kind of talking to my buddy. I was like, where is such and such? And they said, oh, our whole first row that used to be there, they've set up practices in their at home. And so they're doing online practices, or they're just doing their own practice, or apparently the 9:30 classes and the 12 o'clock classes are getting busier because people are working from home still, because a lot of people haven't returned to the offices. There's still a kind of a freedom to stay at home for a couple of days a week. And so people are working differently, and that's impacting the studios.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I think it's great that people are sort of keeping some of that slower momentum going, really, rather than rushing back into everything.
And getting up at like 10 to 6 every morning and going to a yoga class every single morning. Even the studio owner was saying, I used to think that they were just mad. Couldn't they just have one sleep in?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, that's great. Oh, well, that's good to know. And I suppose because we started this whole program right as COVID was kicking off.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how it's shifted and changed over the months. And I don't know, I think here in Australia it's still going to be problematic for a few months. But
we live in fear of popping up again, so we don't feel complete. We don't feel it's over.
Yes. Obviously it's a very opportunistic virus. It just needs a couple of warm bodies in close proximity, and it's ready to go. So I think we all got a bit complacent. Yes, like we've got the training on Friday, and I've got hand sanitizer coming out of every orifice and gloves, and we've been strategizing about how can we have safe morning and afternoon teas. So we've had to buy stuff that's in its own individual wrapping, and it's been like it's a lot of thought when you try to work to that level of sort of safety. But anyhow, hopefully it will work. Thanks, Sandra. That's great. And welcome, Jenny. Hello. She's still coming online. So we're just checking in, and Roxy and Sandra have just given us, just turn your, you just see, that's it. No, Papa, Jenny. Now you should be able to hear me. Just unmute. There we go. There we go.
Great, thank you.
Great. Welcome. We're just checking in. Roxy and Sandra have just checked in. We're just about to go to Valerie, and then we'll come to you. Is that okay?
Oh, that's fine. Sure.
Yeah.
That's
And
fine.
Nell checked in en route to home, and she'll be coming in about another 10 or 15 minutes time.
Okay, so we're all a bit.
Yeah.
higgledy.
That's okay. We can
Yeah.
accommodate higgledy-piggledy.
Okay, that's terrific.
So welcome, Valerie. You're looking very gorgeous tonight.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've just come from yoga, doing the first of this series yoga class. So I'm a bit yogied, but but you know what? I drove
What?
into the drive, and the 6 cubic meters of firewood that was delivered this morning, while I've been doing yoga, my next door neighbour has stacked in the driveway. Now that's a lot of firewood.
That's a great act of kindness there.
Isn't that a great act of kindness? So no
Yes.
wonder I'm looking great.
Yeah. All is well in your universe, Valerie.
Excellent. Oh, it's brilliant. And the sun is still shining.
Yeah, and it's what full was it full
Yeah.
moon last night or is it
Tomorrow.
tomorrow? Yeah.
Pretty close, yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So how did the first class go?
Oh, it was lovely. I take July off. It's my get away from the world month, even despite other things. And but it's so lovely to get back. They're just gorgeous. Love them to bits. So we had a lovely
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a great idea to just take a whole month off. I love that idea.
Well, here, so far south, it's cold. It's
Yeah.
wet, it's winter. It's a good place to just hibernate.
Yes,
All
I'll have to think about that.
the tourists stay away, so it's nice.
I'm just thinking how hard would it be to organise all the other things, but I suppose you just do it, and then people get used to you doing it, and then it just becomes the part of the new pattern.
That's right.
I like that. Okay, well, welcome. You're looking very radiant tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're being very sensible in the West, and we're very pleased that the feds have backed off, and you can have Mr. Palmer. I don't mind what you do. I don't mind what you do with him, Shirley. But just take him out of our hair, will you?
Oh dear, we've got two of them. We've got Bob Catter and Palmer. Like you couldn't,
What's
you know.
Catter doing?
Oh, well, Bob's just Bob. You know.
Oh.
Sorry, Sandra. This is Australian politics. But
Yes. The Catters have always been the Catters. You know, they're never going to be different. But Palmer, anyway, so the feds aren't supporting his keep the borders open.
You've been doing really well, Western Australia. So hang in there. Bit like New Zealand.
Yep.
So.
Two great premiers, Prime Minister.
Yes. Yep. So we'll see how it goes. So I don't think we're out of the woods yet, but let's hope it continues to get better.
Yes.
Lovely. Thanks, Valerie. Jen, how are you travelling?
Yeah, good. Like Valerie just finished teaching. I just shortened the class a bit so I could jump into my last session. But no, fine, really fine. Little concerned about what's happening in southern New South Wales at the moment with the COVID stuff, but no, up here we're good. And I'm actually hoping Queensland will keep their borders open. So I'm coming up there on the weekend to go to Fraser Island camping.
Oh, lovely. Yes. Well, I think as long as you haven't been in any of the hot spots, you should be allowed to get in.
I hope so, yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, where are you based, Jen?
I'm now.
Yeah.
Yeah, at Zala Beach near Coffs Harbour, south of Coffs Harbour.
Yeah, well, that's not a hot spot, so you should be fine.
Yeah, fine.
Yes.
Good, and yeah, really enjoyed the course. Did a bit of reading today because I had some time, and enjoyed going over and reconfirming things. But
great.
Yeah, challenge
Brilliant.
in my teaching, I was trying to bring in some things and went, oh no, that was such a wrong thing to say. Don't be doing that.
There's never a wrong thing, Jen. It's just some things could be more finesse than others.
absolutely inappropriate. I mean, they're the thought bubbles going on while I'm saying things, you know, like, oh, you won't be doing that one.
Well, it couldn't be any worse when I was working with a group of clients with schizophrenia, and halfway through I said, let's all just go crazy. And they said, oh yeah, we know how to do that. I was like, I meant that in a good way. And they said, no, yeah, let's do it. So we all did go a bit crazy for 5 minutes, and we shook and went, and we sounded, and the people upstairs were like, oh God, she whipped them up. But actually it was really good because they got a whole lot of stuff out. And then it was the first time we were able to have a really good sort of bit of a relaxation, as much as you can with a client with schizophrenia, you know.
Yeah.
So sometimes, you know, the mistakes come out, but they have good outcomes.
It is terrific, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes, I'm fine, thanks, Sally.
Fantastic.
Well,
I've been keeping exceptionally well. I've been really busy, and the clinic has just been ridiculous. And I have to talk to the person who controls my diary to just be a little bit more reasonable. Oh, yes, I could put you in between, blah, 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 you know. But I'm most probably carrying a heavier clinic load than I really want to be carrying right now. So I'm in the process of sort of just closing the books for a little bit so that we can rationalize things. But I feel it's sad in a way that my business is a bit of a barometer for the degree of human suffering in the world.
I was just about to say there must be a lot of people.
Lots of people. You know, and old clients reconnecting again, haven't spoken to for years. And, you know, some clients in Melbourne who I've worked with when I was in Sydney, and they were in Sydney, and so feeling very depressed, and one client's quite suicidal about having to go back into lockdown. And so there's a lot of mental health that I think, I know the government has sort of cursorily talked about it, but there really is significant mental health out there, issues out there right now that are going to continue on way past when we get over COVID or whatever happens with COVID. Yeah, so that's been busy. And then we've got the training coming up this weekend in Brizzy, the trauma sensitive training. So we've had to limit it to 20 people per course because of the venue. And so we're fully booked with a waiting list. So there's lots of people that are still looking to do the work. So we made a choice not to offer online training for the training, because we felt, whilst I think there's been some wonderful, I've certainly benefited from a lot of people taking their stuff online, because I wouldn't have been able to either get there or travel or pay. And so I really see the benefit in making that available. But also I hold the do no harm really strongly. And I'm not sure if you can run like the trauma sensitive yoga training with people that haven't got any, a lot of them haven't got any sort of awareness as safely as I'd like online. I think you can, you know, certainly run a yoga class and stuff, but particularly in the clinicians training where we do a lot of interactive stuff, it's just too hard. So this is other than the Sydney class where we ran in March, Brisbane is the next one that we've been able to run, and we might run November in Melbourne, but we don't think we're going to be able to do Sydney in September. Like Sydney's looking good, is that? Not going to get ahead of the curve somehow. I think it's going to get out of control down there. So anyhow, we'll have to see. But no, but I'm feeling good and very robust, and you know, using all my self-care strategies. So
I was just going to say, you must have good self-care happening, because that's a lot going on.
Yes, yeah. But I think, like, for all of us, like, if you do what you love to do, that does feed you. And I'm at the stage now in my career where I only take on what I really enjoy. I say no to the things that I know aren't up my alley or doesn't follow my intent or whatever. And so that makes life a lot simpler. So yeah. So here we all are. So and I'm not sure where Bianca is. So she's listening to the recording. Hello. And I know Nell's coming in a little bit later. So we were going to start looking at spatial orientation, but I thought before we do that, we might explore spatial orientation. So this is the last of the 6 principles around the trauma sensitive work. Each time we've got together, we're exploring the principles, and they sort of are a bit of a scaffolding for the work. So remember, we started with interoceptive awareness, which is really starting to invite the person to have and notice their body. They don't actually even know. Like, it was interesting, I was just working with a client before this session who came in. She is very hyperactive, not really breathing terribly well. She's done lots of therapy. She's 58 or something. Never been in a relationship, never kissed anybody, is hug starved, a workaholic, earns lots of money, but is miserably unhappy, and just wants some peace. And so I was inviting her to really work with her body, and working with this quality of comfort and trying to understand how interoceptively aware is she. And she's so comfortable in the speaking, the talking, but not so comfortable in the body. And she kept saying, "Oh no, I'm fine, I'm comfortable," And I said, let's just pause for a second. Let's see if we can just get a little bit more comfortable. See how we did some process, and she really sort of sunk into her bones. And she actually has quite a good level of awareness about her body, which I was surprised about. But she's just so busy the whole time. She's never really gives herself the space to drop into that. Yeah. She doesn't have a language for what she's connecting with. So, when you're running your yoga classes, often, we're not asking the students to tell us what they're noticing. So, when we're inviting them in that interoceptive way to be curious, we might offer language, which starts to, start to put some sort of words to what they might be experiencing without saying this is what you're experiencing. But even as yoga teachers, we can still start to build a somatic vocabulary so that people can better describe what they're feeling internally. Yeah. So anyway, so we did interoceptive work, and then we looked at choice and effective action. So you can't really choose to do something differently until you know what it is you're currently doing. So this is sort of the scaffolding. One sort of sits on top of the other. So choice and effective action then gives us an opportunity. Now we have a body. What do we want to do with this body? And this is a big part of the work. Whether the clients have got trauma in their background or not, I feel it's really useful for everybody to be given this opportunity to, feel what they're feeling. And even with this client, she said, I've done thousands of body scans in my time. She said, but tonight's the first time I've actually felt my body in the scan. So it's always interesting, isn't it, as a yoga teacher, to hear that. I wonder how many times I've offered that to students, and how many times the students haven't really felt it for whatever reason, and to not assume that what we're offering is actually falling where we're hoping it's going to fall. So, the principles of being consistent and almost quite repetitive to some extent. I don't know whether it was this group I was reflecting to, but there's this group I've been working with now for 12 years. Many of them have been coming weekly, and my invitation about, at any time you can always rest. One of the smart Alex in the class, we were doing something, and she said, of course I know that at any time I could just rest. And everyone burst out laughing. I said, good, I'm glad you finally got that message. She said, I hear it all the time, and it's so useful, and she doesn't have significant trauma in her background, so I think we, these techniques we've been exploring have a lot of value just in a general yoga class as well. So choice and action. And then we looked at the concepts of rhythm. So rhythm, I think, is the next sort of really important regulating feature that we can bring into our yoga work. And remember, we looked at our own rhythm, the rhythms we establish in the class, the movements that we can do to cultivate rhythm, the sequencing of breath with movement in a rhythmic way, such as the sun breaths. Really useful work. Yeah. And then last session, we looked at sensing muscle dynamics, where we start to feel that we have control over the intensity of our body. So it's a more nuanced principle, this particular one, to actually be able to feel the muscle, but then also be able to feel that I have control over how intense I have that feeling. And of course, that has a great direct line feed back into how is this person living their life. If you're living a full-on intense life, know that you've actually got control over changing the intensity of that, just like you have control over changing the intensity of feeling your bicep. Yeah, simple but very effective. So this last principle that we're going to look at tonight, spatial orientation, is quite a nuanced principle, I feel, for particularly for trauma survivors, because it does mean that they do need to have a body to some extent, but it can also help the filling in the body map in the mind. So we have a body map in our mind. Our mind knows where our foot is and our hand is and our head is and everything else. And if we're not actively using it, or we're often in a stress response that might be a freeze, for example, after a while, sometimes our awareness of our body parts becomes a little hazy. And so spatial orientation can start to fill that body map in again. Yeah. And so over time, this concept of spatial orientation, and sometimes people feel that spatial orientation is just about knowing where my body is in space. And there's absolutely is a quality of that. And there's also balance, the proprioceptive aspect of the work. That's also a part of spatial orientation. But the most significant part of spatial orientation is filling in the body map. And so to do that, we have to engage the eye. So we're going to, before we have a look at the PowerPoint tonight, I just want to talk about that a little bit and we can explore it. So as you're sitting where you are, just take a moment to bring your body into some comfort. It may already be feeling quite comfortable, but you might take a moment to see if there was anything else you could do to be just that little bit more comfortable. Let all those little movements happen. And let's see if the breath can settle itself. Just notice your breath. So if you've just come from a yoga class, you might still have a bit of yoga teacher adrenaline in you, or you might be feeling sort of quite in your bones. So just be noticing. And you can work eyes open or eyes closed. And just taking a moment just to become aware of the right hand, wherever the right hand is, whether it's resting on your lap or on the desk or in the chair. Just see if you can feel into your right hand. You might be able to feel the palm of the hand, the back of the hand, inviting awareness into the thumb, and then the next 4 fingers, in whichever way you want to connect with them. And if I was to invite you, if you could imagine that you could see your right hand in your mind's eye, just see if you can get a picture of that. It might be really clear for you, or it may be a little hazy. Or it may look a bit like static on the television. You can't get much at all. So just notice, because you're all yoga teachers, you've most probably got quite a good clear picture. Okay, so just allow a couple of breaths, however the breath wants to move. And then I'm going to invite you to gently open your eyes and let your eyes look down to the right hand and actually have a look at your right hand. And at the moment, the right hand might be passively resting on your leg or on a chair. And then bring some movement to the right hand and watch the fingers moving. And even being curious about, how do your fingers move? Do they sort of moving in a flowing way, or are they a little jerky? Are they moving together, or are they taking turns? So just notice. And then in your own time, if you wish, just bring the hand up, give it a little bit of movement, but allowing the eye to focus on the hand and let the hand move through space. Eyes just tracking the hand. You might see the palm of the hand and then the back of the hand and then the fingers in different orientations. You could make the movement bigger, eyes tracking the movement of the hand. Fast or slow, whatever works for you. And then you could bring the other hand in as well. We could have a hand dance. Hands moving together now. Just noticing both hands. However the hands are moving, just noticing. And if you're opening them like this, it might be hard to see both hands moving at the same time because your eyes can't go out to both. But you might go out to one hand and then out to the other hand and look to each outstretched hand and just see your hands in space. Give the fingers a bit of a wiggle. And then we might want to shake the hands out. And then just taking a moment, letting the hands settle again. The shoulders might want to have a little bit of a roll, whatever dispersing energy needs to happen. And then once again, just closing eyes or keeping them softly open, whatever works for you. Just bringing awareness once again to the right hand. Maybe more aware of it now because it's had some movement. Or less, just notice what your experience is. But also in your mind's eye, just take a moment to see your right hand. You might be able to see how your hand was moving in space, how your fingers move with your hand. And just being curious around how you're noticing the hand and how you're seeing the hand in your mind's eye after that little experiment with moving the hand and eye tracking movement. Might feel no difference, or you might be noticing something different. So just be open to noticing. That's it. And then when you're ready, we might bring, once again, a little bit of movement to the hands. We might want to have a bit of a stretch. You can open the eyes when you're ready. Bit of a yawn. Shoulders roll. Okay. And I suppose what I'm interested in, and that was just a quick little experiment, was that when we came to imagine the hand the second time around, was it easier to imagine the hand? Did you have a different sense of the hand, or did it feel the same as before we did the spatial orientation? Be interesting just to know what people experience. Valerie?
I'm not a visualizer, so I couldn't see my hand. But the second time around, I was much more aware. So the first time around, I was aware of my palm being on my leg.
Yes.
But I didn't have any feeling of the back of my hand. But the second time, I had awareness. Obviously, the movement did something energetically, and so there was an awareness to the back of my hand, and I'd completely forgotten the first time that I've got a Band-Aid on the back of my right hand. But the second time I had awareness of the Band-Aid and awareness of the jewellery on my fingers that I hadn't had the first time. So, yes, I don't know what that says.
Okay. So when you were moving the hand, and as you say, I'm not a visual person, but did you notice the Band-Aid on your hand? Did you see the fingers moving?
I saw the fingers moving because,
yes.
Yeah, but I completely missed the jewellery and the Band-Aid. So,
Nice.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, it's perfect actually, because this is exactly what we're talking about. If we had time to play with that a little bit more, you know, to move the hand with your eyes closed is one experience. To move your hand and track the hand moving is another experience. And the suggestion is, and the research would suggest, that when you connect the eye to the moving part, it turbocharges the imprint of that part for the brain. We get a much more discriminating sense of that part because we've got a visual sense, and it may have been that your vision unconsciously picked up some of that other stuff, but also obviously movement will bring more awareness to whatever it is we're moving, hopefully. So there'll be elements of that. But when we add the eye to the movement, it really does sort of almost like in a coloring in book for the brain, fill that hand in a little bit more so that it's much more accessible. And I don't know, I didn't get you to check the left hand because we didn't focus a lot on the left hand. We focused mainly on the right hand.
Yes.
Yeah. So good one. That's great. Thank you, Valerie. Anyone else notice anything? It's okay if you didn't notice anything. You may already have a really good, solid body map and you've already got a good sense.
I noticed that when I first imagined my hand in my mind's eye, it was still. And then after using my eyes, I could actually imagine, I could actually almost feel it moving around.
Yes.
And I had much less of a sense of my left hand the whole time than my right hand. Even it was just kind of like it wasn't as, the imagery wasn't as strong.
Wasn't as strong.
No,
Yes.
it was kind of like almost shadowy, whereas the right hand was quite kind of felt really filled out, whereas the left hand,
Yeah.
I was like, kind of like I wanted to almost touch it to bring it
Yes,
a
to
little
bring
bit
it
more
in.
alive. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And we'd given the left hand a little bit of a cursory attention when we were moving, but we were really focusing on this right. So for you, Sandra, there was a difference in spatial awareness in your in the mind's eye with the right hand. Yeah. Beautiful. Nice. Jenny or Roxy, anything you want to add to that?
Very similar.
We'll go Jenny and then we'll go Roxy.
Sorry, Roxy, I can't see everyone, so sorry about that.
Have you got us all on gallery view? Have you got us on gallery view?
I'm using a different, I'm using my little tablet, so let me just see. Anyway, what I'll say is that I'm very similar to Valerie and Sandra with what I felt, but a lot more awareness of my hands after we've done the visual and movement. And for both hands, I felt much more connected, like I knew where they were.
Lovely. That's good.
Yeah, they're very similar. It was a good practice. Funnily enough, that's what I was doing tonight in my class without realising what I was doing. Well, fully realised what I was doing. So, yeah.
So you didn't think you were that smart, huh?
I had no idea, which seems to be the problem. I keep falling into things.
Well, yoga teachers are so intuitive, and I'm super. Yeah, like we know you know what you're doing, but you're not sometimes quite sure what it is I did to get that. But I know it feels right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Nice one. Roxy, anything to add?
Yeah, I was really conscious about the weight of my right hand compared to my left hand. So that was really interesting. When I did the visualization first, I could see my hands, but the second time I could feel it, or just really conscious of the weight. My right hand more so than my left.
Beautiful, wonderful. Well, thank you. So that experiment worked well. Thank God. So we're going to explore this principle now of spatial orientation a bit more, but this is what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to really, fill in the body map for the client. And for trauma survivors, the body map is very patchy, and particularly if certain parts of the body have been part of the trauma. So if there was restraint, so either hands were restrained or feet were restrained, or parts of the body were part of the trauma attack, then sometimes that body map becomes very hard. The brain doesn't address it because there's a whole lot of emotional load that sits with that body positioning. So when we work with spatial orientation, when we're moving, we're breathing, so we're regulating the person's stress response to some extent, but at the same time, we're now inviting a bit of a momentary recognition that I have hands, or I have feet, or we'll look at other postures that we use with this principle as a way of starting to safely fill in those body parts, rather than really like what might happen in a therapeutic spaces where a clinician might decide to zero in on something. Oh, you can't feel your hand, let's go there and work with it, which there's a reason why the person can't feel their hand. It's loaded with something. Whereas as a yoga teacher, we can invite this sort of almost quite innocent exploration with movement, and it feels a lot safer for clients. But we're doing something really important in that we're reclaiming the body. So these descriptions of feeling heavier or more aware, or noticing actually that I had a band-aid and some jewelry on this hand. So the subtle distinctions of touch and connection, the touch receptors start to become more attuned through this concept of spatial orientation, but it all is through eye tracking. So we need the eyes to be open, and we need to be actually looking at the part as a way of filling in that body map in the brain. Now, we don't need to let the participants know that's all the stuff we're doing, because that's very cognitive. But by inviting the practice of spatial orientation, over time, they'll be able to reclaim parts of their body that they may not have actually been accessing for quite a long time. Now, if they're seeing a therapist at the same time, which is always the best combination for trauma survivors, then in therapy, they can work with that a little bit more, and, you know, work with stories and themes that might be sitting around that. But to actually be able to just start to reclaim that is the first step. Yeah. Welcome, Nell.
Hi, Nell.
Thank you. Hello. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. That's okay. You've had a big day, so I'm impressed that you got here at all. So
I
done.
didn't want to miss the last session, but you go ahead. I'll watch the video to catch up. So don't let me interrupt you.
Okay. Well, welcome. We've just had a little check-in, and we just did a little exercise about exploring spatial orientation, which you can follow in the video.
Thank you.
So we won't talk too much more about that. So that'll be a surprise for Nell when she gets to the recording.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't think we caught Jenny's head spinning, but anyhow.
Oh, no.
She did a Linda Blair on us.
Okay.
So let's get into spatial orientation and talk about this a little bit. And interestingly, you know, when I put this particular session together, there's not a lot of really specific information about this concept of spatial orientation. We're still really learning the impact of eye tracking movement and how that fills in this body map that I'm talking about. And, you know, I've worked a little bit with people that have had amputations, and they will sort of still have a body map. I'm just going to mute everybody because I can hear myself. And that'll stop the feedback. There we go. That's okay. So if you need to ask a question, you'll just have to unmute your microphone or put your hand up and I'll unmute you. When I've worked with clients that have had amputations, you know, they can often, you know, when they ask, so for example, might be saying my right foot is feeling really heavy. They don't have a right foot, but if I can approximate where their right foot might actually be and slide my hand under as if there was a right foot there, they'll go, oh, that's it. It just feels so heavy. Now there's no foot actually there. Yeah, but the mind map actually hasn't caught on with that. So it's still sending signals that you have a foot on your end of your right leg. Yeah. And so part of the work of that is to work with the clients to actually look down as they're getting the message that the foot's not there. And it can be very confusing. I don't know if you've ever seen the false arm experiment, where they get a person sitting at a desk, and they've got their hands on the desk, and then they bring in a false hand. So the false hand slips in alongside, let's say, the inside of the right hand, and the right hand is on the outside of a screen. So the person can no longer see their right hand, and the false hand is there, okay? And then the guy will come along with a hammer and literally hit the false hand, and the person goes, oh, and feels it in their right hand, okay? So it's a very useful party trick. I don't suggest you try it at parties. If I can find an example of it, I'll put it, because it's quite interesting to see how the brain sort of says, I know that I can see a hand there, that must be my right hand. Yeah, and he's feeling it in his right hand, even though his right hand isn't being hit. Yeah, so sorry Jen, let me just unmute you there. So you'll have to unmute yourself. For some reason Zoom's changed their options. There we go. Yep.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking that reminds me of the stories you hear about twin women. One of them's in labour and the other feels her pain.
Yes.
It reminds me of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, particularly if they're identical. It's very strong in identical twins. I have identical twin nieces, and when one of them, she's had 3 children, the other hasn't been able to have children, but the one that hasn't been able to have children went through the birthing pains. She worked for Qantas, and she was flying over the Pacific, and her sister went into labor. She had to go off duty because she went into full-on birth on the plane.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And she said, oh, my sister must be delivering. And as soon as her sister delivered, she was fine. She was ready for the dinner service. Like, so there's lots of interesting research there, particularly where identical twins have come from the one egg, and there's been a split of the egg. You know, there's a sense of it really challenges our idea of our neuroregulation just being our body, versus where you have 2 bodies that share the same sort of genetic origins. It's fascinating stuff. Okay, so no worries. So window of tolerance, we're always looking at this, and once again, for this to really be working optimally for clients, they need to be in that optimal arousal zone. So certainly if someone is hyper or hypo-aroused, I might bring their awareness to some part of their body, particularly with hypo-arousal. I find that's a good way of bringing people back closer to the optimal zone. So in a yoga teacher perspective, it might be where the student has become very disconnected from the class. And we might invite, so for example, if they're lying on their back or something like that, we might invite them to lift a hand in the air and watch their hand moving, which is something that most people can do. Yeah. And it's a way of starting to re-engage the brain and connection with the body. But really the most valuable place to do this work is, once again, when the person's in the optimal zone, they're not in a stress response, their nervous system is relatively calm and relaxed, and we get the maximum sort of body map filling in when we can do this work in optimal zone. So typically in a yoga class, people might arrive, not necessarily in the optimal zone, but as we move through the class, we'd be seeing people coming more back into that zone. And that's when we would be sort of using this principle. So I tend to use this principle more often towards the end of a class than the beginning of a class. So this concept of spatial orientation, it's our ability to move around in our environment using an innate sense of direction. And I don't know with any of you, I'm sure you've all explored this, doing balance poses, but playing around by doing them with your eyes open and your eyes closed. So if you do a tree, for example, with your eyes open, you might be very strong and steady. Your eye has got a point you're gazing at, and you're steady, like an oak tree. And then you close your eyes and suddenly you fall over or you lose balance totally. And so we tend to use our eyes a lot for balance. So this is something different to what I'm talking about around filling in the body map, but it's also part of spatial orientation. So this is the concept of proprioception. You know, where are my receptors telling me that I'm in? Am I straight up and down? You know, when you see students lying on their mats and they're diagonal, but they think they're straight, or they're in all these sort of unusual positions, or, you know, you invite someone to stand up nice and straight and they're like that. So their proprioceptors are telling them that they're straight, but actually they're not actually straight. Yeah. And so an interesting practice to play just with yourself is if you're doing your favorite balance practice, as long as it's one that isn't too dangerous, is to settle into it and then close your eyes and see if you can feel yourself into the balance rather than use your eyes to balance. Yeah. Because if you can balance with your eyes closed, you're actually accessing the proprioceptors. When you're balancing with your eyes open, you're actually accessing the eye sensory orientation to find a mark to settle on, and then that becomes our balancing focus. The problem is, you know, out in the world, we may not always have that stability in our environment to find a fixed point to gaze at. So if we're thrown off balance that quickly, you know, if we can't use our internal balance receptors to balance us, then we don't have the same sort of resilience as we could have if we really switch our balance receptors on. And playing with that myself, I found it didn't take long to actually orient your balance practices to the balance receptors versus eye. Does that make sense? Has anyone ever explored that in their practice? Sandra's nodding her head. Have you noticed that, Sandra, that you can sometimes takes a little while to?
Yeah, it's really, it can be quite because I can balance quite well on doing tree, for example, but as soon as you close your eyes, it's just kind of like the whole world kind of like goes all wobbly, and then it's it feels quite like a different thing. Yeah.
Yes. And there's something, the only way I can describe, I think we each have to find our way into the balance receptors. But what I find is I ground into the bones first. So I might be balancing, I've got my eyes open, I can feel the weight of my bones.
And I've got a knee replacement on one leg, and I find it much harder to do that balance with my eyes closed on that side, because I don't think the bones talk to each other as.
Yes. Most probably, absolutely. There's something about being in the bones that I think helps us then close our eyes and be able to call on those receptors. And then I actually, and this won't help Valerie because she's not visual as such, but I imagine there's all these like little sort of beacons in my body that are the receptors, and they're keeping me balanced. So I bring in that visualization, and I breathe, and I smile. And there's something about smiling that really helps us settle in. So my sense is it's the engagement of the ventral vagal nerve, and the system goes, I'm in balance. So it changes a balance practice, and both are useful. So I'm not suggesting that balancing with eyes open isn't useful. It's very useful. But what I'm suggesting is if you also explore your most favorite balance position with your eyes closed, then you almost really feel the space around you. Like it's almost holding you as you situate your body in space. It's the only way I can describe it. So something to play with there. So obviously spatial orientation, it's crucial for us to be able to adapt to our environment and to get from one point to another. So what I've noticed a lot with clients that have had significant trauma in their life and they've got a disrupted body map is they're often very clumsy, or they walk into walls, or they trip over bolsters, or, you know, they could be walking across the floor and they'll find something to trip over because they're just not really in their bodies. Or they'll say something like, oh, I've got really big feet, or, you know, I'm always falling over my feet, or stuff like that. But there's something about their navigatability that is being disrupted in the trauma. Yeah. And almost a little bit like if I'm trying to drive a car, but I haven't got a clear sense of where the gear stick is, where the clutch is, where the accelerator is. And I'm trying to drive this car and it's a bit clunky, versus I know where all those components of the car are and I can access them all easily and they work together. That's what we're trying to achieve in spatial orientation, bringing all those parts of the body together so the person can be more coordinated and actually move around in the world a little bit easier. And it's not uncommon for trauma survivors to have real, they'll often present and say, I've got geographical dyslexia, or I end up getting lost, or I turn down a street and then I'm disoriented and I don't know where I am. Yeah. And so a big part of this is spatial orientation. And we know the hippocampus manages this function to some extent, but also the cerebellum and other aspects of the insula and the corpus callosum are all parts that feed into this sense of spatial orientation, as well as body map. And we know that the more we use this function, the deeper the gray matter is. And the gray matter is what forms the prefrontal cortex. That's our thinking part of our brain. That's our executive functioning. So the suggestion is, when you really work with this principle of spatial orientation and sort of really settle into it, that people are actually then able to settle in thinking a little bit clearer too. Okay. Now, just an interesting aside, because we're all using GPS a lot now, it's really impacted this capacity we have to orient ourselves in space. Like, I don't know, some of you must probably too young to remember, but I can remember street directories. We used to call them Gregory's or the Refidex here in Queensland. And I remember driving around with them on my lap, and I always had to orient the map in the direction I was going. My husband would always say, I don't know why you females do that. You orient the map to where you're going. But now, I just listen to the GPS and I don't have to use, I don't have to look down at the map and then look up to see, oh, there's that street or there's that thing. So we're actually seeing, particularly in a generation that have never had to do that type of thing, that those functions of the brain that are very important in us navigating around our space aren't very well developed. Yeah. Remember, the brain is very plastic, so they can become well developed, but we need to be able to actually use, sorry, that's just my credit card machine, but they actually have to be able to use those parts of the brain. So sometimes I think it's good to just turn the GPS off and see if you can find your way home when you're in a new place, just to start using that, or go for a walk and say, look, I don't really know where I'm going. I've got a general sense of where home is, and I'm just going to see if I can find my way. Actually be open to using those parts of the brain. Yep. But there's another thing too, which I think is quite interesting, is that men and women use spatial orientation differently. So that's useful to know if we're running a class and we're giving invitations to work in a more spatially oriented way, how we orient to our world. So, for example, men will focus on specific points. So the classic metaphor for that is, if a man was to go to the fridge and look for the butter, if the butter isn't right in front of him, he won't be able to see the butter because he's looking for butter. He looks, I can't see butter. There's no butter, okay? Women focus on the relationship between objects. So she goes to the fridge, she's looking for the butter, the butter's not there. There's the jam, there's the thing, there's that over there, oh, there's the butter. So rather than fixating on just one point, and if I can't find that, then there's nothing, women tend to be able to have a bit of a journey. They're able to orient between different objects. And I don't know about yourself, but I find when I'm given directions, for someone to say to me, you'll go 3 kilometers and then you'll turn right and then you'll turn left, means nothing. But if they say to me, you'll go along, you'll see a big petrol station. Now, a little bit past the petrol station on the other side, you'll see a school. Now, once you get to the school, and I can orient on that much more easily than very specific sort of navigational points. Yeah. So what does that mean as a yoga teacher? And I've played with this a little bit, is that when we're giving our instructions, it's useful to realize that men, you know, so for example, if we were just to do a spatial orientation where I have my arms out to each side, if I'm doing this with a man, I might say, you might turn to look to your right hand and see your right hand and give your fingers a bit of a wiggle. Then come across and look at your left hand and give your left hand a little bit of a wiggle. Then come back and look at the right, come back and look at the left, and there your hands in space. So I'm focusing on specific points, the hands. If I was to use the same instruction for a woman, I'd say, take a moment, bring your hands up and focus on the right hand. Have a look at the palm of the hand, the fingers, the palm of the hand, come down to the wrist, down to the forearm, crook of the elbow, upper arm, coming across the chest, to the shoulder, to the upper arm, crook of that elbow, forearm, wrist, left palm. So I'm actually helping her track through all the parts that are related to the right and left palm. She has the capacity to be able to track that way. If I said the same thing to a man, he's more than likely to skip over all that stuff in the middle and just go right palm, left palm. Yeah. So when we're offering this spatial orientation with the eyes, noticing to just be mindful of that women have a greater capacity to link right and left hand with all the bits that are in between right and left hand, but men aren't. So if you've got a mixed class, the invitation might sound, you know, take a moment, bring your hands up. You've got a couple of choices here. You could just look at the right hand and look at the left hand and then just keep looking at each hand. Or alternatively, you could start at the right and allow your eyes to track all the way up your arm, across your chest, down the other side to your other hand. And I guarantee you'll watch the men and they'll just do this. And the women will go like that. It's quite fun if you've got a mixed class to watch that. So I just think it's an interesting little tweak when we're thinking about how do we orient in space? How do we give instruction? You know, I suppose even to finding us, you know, that men will just want to know, I go this and do I do this and then I do that, but women like to know what's along the way. Yeah. Any questions on that? That makes sense? So now, spatial orientation in yoga. We looked last time at sensing muscle dynamics. So touch is important. It's another way of filling in the mind map a little. But particularly if I, for example, have my hand on my bicep and I'm moving the arm to feel the bicep muscle moving under my arm, but also I've got my eyes and I'm watching this. Okay, so if I add the eye to sensing muscle dynamics where I can, that's even more potent. Yeah, because now I'm feeling the muscle moving. I'm looking, you know, I might be able to move the hand, look at the muscle moving, feeling the muscle moving, look at the muscle moving. I'm sort of maximizing the potential for filling in that body map. And then of course using the eyes, because that helps us track the movement and the orientation in space. So this is how we can work with spatial orientation. And when we think of different yoga practices that we can invite into the class to work with this, obviously there are some practices that lend themselves to this more than others. Yeah. So warrior is a wonderful practice for spatial orientation. We can bring our arms up, we can extend the gaze out to one side, out to the other. Remember, you can also work with warrior, where you might come from warrior 2, you have one arm extended up, one arm behind on the leg behind. You can look up to that extended arm, allow your eyes to track across the body down to the arm behind, and that's your body in space. So remembering that we also like to add that explicit instruction. This is your body in space. These are your hands in space. This is your feet in space. This is your arm in space. So that we're explicitly really coloring in the body map for the client. So warrior is useful. I'm interested to hear what others think about what's useful. I'm just going to stop the share for a sec so we can all come back into the main square. What other postures or practices are useful? Remembering that you need to be able to track the movement with your eye. or track it, track the. And remember too, with the arms out like this, if there's movement rather than just holding them static, that's even more useful, because that really sort of sends a whole lot of messages. I'm moving my hands, oh, and I can also see my hands, rather than holding them statically. It's a little more subtle. It's still useful, but not as useful as movement and seeing. Jen, you got a suggestion?
Yeah, I used a couple of poses tonight, actually. Warrior, I watched a YouTube a few days ago about yoga dance, and it was moving from warrior with the arms extended, but on the in-breath, you raise, for example, the right arm up and bend to the left, so look left, and then you'd bring the arm up, back out, wide, and look to the right, palm turned up, and that was a rhythm that I did
Nice.
5 repetitions each side. So that's one, and the knees bending and straightening as well.
Yep.
And the group tonight really liked that. That was a new thing I brought in. And they were all doing it in the same time. It was quite beautiful, because I had 11 people in the class tonight. So I said, oh, you're all doing yoga dance. How good. So that was one. And then the other one that comes to mind about what you're explaining is I use windmill a bit with the fingers interlocked and the palms turned up. So watching the hand and rotating the body is something else that springs to mind. So.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Good suggestions, Jen. That reminds me, like, you could do any of the sun breath practices, but make sure the eyes are tracking. So for example, you know, you could bring the hands in, hands away, and let's track the fingers. See the hands coming towards you, see the hands coming away. So you could, any movement that is accessible with the eyes, and that would be useful as well. These ones are more like when we're working on diagonals or out this way, are more about not only that, the hand, for example, but feel the body in space. And if we can also extend the awareness from fingertip to heel, you know, we're getting a sense of the whole body. So we're not only just trying to fill in these parts of the body, but we're trying to fill in the whole body. And so that's where sometimes too, you know, placing your hand on your body and actually looking down and seeing the breath moving underneath your hands. That's your breath moving in your body. You know, it's another way of sort of filling in that map. Yeah. Any other thoughts from others? Practices that you've used with this concept of spatial orientation? Nell?
Yeah, I think cross patterning is,
Yes.
you know, a good one. And then with Drew Yoga, we have an EBR one where we're looking at the palm.
Yes.
And yeah, alternating, looking across at one palm and then the other.
That's a lovely one. And you can add that instruction to that movement about, you know, tracking all the way along and out to the other side.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
And there's even like the Anahata breath, but
Yes.
I probably haven't focused enough on really tracking
Yes.
the hands. And it's the one where you can go very much into sort of the energy of it as opposed to staying in the body.
Exactly. And those of you that are Drew Yoga teachers, remember with EBR3, you've got the wonderful, the windmill practice, and then the opposite hand moving practice and watching the hand. There's a lot of spatial orientation in EBR3. It's a big spatial orientation. So EBR is energy block release, and they're sort of put together. They're a series of sequences, comes from some orthobionomy and also osteopathic understanding of the body to help open up the joints and things like that. It's quite an amazing sequence. Thanks, Nell. Others, any other thoughts people have of movements? Think about triangle. Triangle's a good one. You could, you know, modify triangle. You could be in triangle. You could be look up to that arm, look down to that hand, see your hands in space. This is your body. So you could work with triangle. There's one that I've used quite a bit, which seems to be quite nice. where we might start, we take a full stretch and then we come into a forward bend, okay? And then as we breathe in, we bring the arms out to each side. And then as the hands come to meet above the head, the invitation is to see the palms connect. Then allow the eyes to track the hand as they come down. Let the hands continue until they get to about navel. And then we're going to rotate the hands so the fingers come down to the ground. Yeah. Keep tracking the hands, folding forward as you come forward, opening up the hands, coming into forward bend again. And so it's actually, when you do it a number of times, it really is quite calming for the nervous system. It really settles a very agitated mind, but also is this wonderful sense of feeling your arms moving in space. This is your body, but allowing the eyes to track. And if you wanted to, you could explore that by not having the eyes tracking and then do a couple with the eyes tracking and see what you notice. Like, play with the practices, you know, see how they feel for you. That's a good insight as to how they might be able to help students. Yeah. So yeah, so any practice that you can come to, you know, things like bridge, camel, cat, cow, they don't really lend themselves to spatial orientation as such. Possibly in dog, you could look down to the feet, look forward to the hands, you know, and work that way. But because they're also practices, particularly dog, that does require some strength and things like that, you know, they're not as easy to access as some of the other practices we're exploring, like warrior and triangle and some of the breathing practices and things like that.
Lily,
Okay.
there's a lovely drill one called Ocean Waves, where you hand out, as you breathe in, you take the hands a little wide, as you breathe out, they come back in. So you start off with your hands really close.
Yes.
Together, and then you can track.
Yes, well, that's actually, I'm glad you raised that one, Valerie, because you can only get to the periphery on that one. So you get
That's
to a
what I was
certain
just going
point.
to say. You can, so you just go out, whatever your periphery is, till you can see as far, rather than as wide as you can. You just come out to take it as far as you can still see in your peripheral vision, and then start to bring it back again, a bigger in movement. Yeah, until you come back in. So
yes, and with that, when we're tracking with peripheral movement, the invitation is that the eye gaze is forward, but we can still see our hands. So we're not moving the eyes to see the hands. So the eye gaze stays forward. But we could all try this. If you just brought your hands up as Valerie showed, bring your hands together and you can see your hands. Now let your eyes stay central and allow the hands to move out. And at some point you'll lose the hands. When you've lost the hands, come back to the point where you can see both hands in your peripheral. So for each of us, it'll be different. And why this is so potent, actually, particularly for trauma survivors, particularly people that have been physically assaulted, that their eye muscles freeze. And they sometimes get that sort of startle. You know, you see some people who've got this sort of startled gaze on their face. So tracking their peripheral, what it does is it invites a stretching of the eye muscles. So you might work with someone and they can only go to there. They go any further, they lose the peripheral track. They can't see the hands anymore. So if you just keep playing with it, that after a while, the peripheral vision starts to open up a little bit. And in Feldenkrais, there's a whole area of work of just that, working with peripheral vision. And that actually impacts neck, headache problems, jaw problems, just working with peripheral vision. Because if the eye muscles are really tight, then a lot of the other muscles here, the muscles in the forehead and in the jaw, the tongue, and the occipital will all be tight as well. And so just by expanding peripheral, we're sort of like softening all those other accessory muscle systems that feed into that. That's a great one to bring up. It's not so much, it is spatial orientation to some extent, but the real benefit is that working on the peripheral vision. Yeah, thank you, Valerie. It's an interesting one. Okay, So let's just quickly, what I wanted to do. So we've looked at the concept of spatial orientation. And as I've said, it's something that you can add to a class. It doesn't have to be a big part of your class, but I always try to have some quality of spatial orientation in a class, particularly if we're going to move into a relaxation. There's a sense of trying to orient the people into their bodies a little bit more. I find balance practices are a little more accessible for people if we've done a bit of spatial orientation work prior to balance. And then over time, you know, we're filling in this body map for the person, and they're able to actually access their body more. They're able to orient better in space. They're able to move around and navigate. They have less sort of geographical dyslexia. Life just becomes a lot simpler and easier for them. So there's a lot of benefits in spatial orientation. Any other questions or things that people are unsure about in terms of spatial orientation? Perfect.
Can I
Mel.
make a quick comment, please? You may have mentioned this earlier, but I imagine this helps with aging. You know, we lose balance. It's quite common, isn't it, to lose balance in that spatial orientation, and people end up having falls and things. I'm often sort of thinking of what's going to help us stay younger.
Yes. You're spot on. Were you here when we were talking about practicing balancing with eyes closed?
Yes.
So that's something useful to play with, because that actually almost foolproofs us. You know, part of the reason why elderly fall over more often, I might just mute you while I'm talking because I can hear me coming back through. Oh, there we go. Part of the reason why the elderly fall over a lot is because their eyesight is going, and they use their eyesight to orient. Now, because their eyesight isn't as sharp, they're not able to orient as well, and so they miss seeing things, or they're misaligning their bodies. And so we have to turn that internal proprioception back on, so that we would actually stand in tree, and we could be as still in tree with our eyes closed as with our eyes open. And when we play with that, it does feel different. There's a different orientation in the body when you're orienting with eyes open to orienting with eyes closed. So definitely, I think there's a sort of an anti-aging aspect to that. I'll just unmute you again. Problems with my mouse tonight. It's being very, there we go. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, Nell? Just to unmute yourself. All okay? Okay, all right. Great.
Unmute. Yes, all good. Thank you, Shirley.
All
yes.
good, brilliant. So I thought in the last sort of 10 minutes before we finish tonight, it might be nice just to take a moment to reflect on how your role as a yoga teacher's been impacted over this program, and things that might have changed for you. I picked this particular picture because I think, you know, people who have done this work sort of stand out a little bit. Not that all yoga teachers are black umbrellas, but I'd like to think, you know, I'm just explaining the image here, that, you know, you stand out a little bit from the crowd. And certainly the feedback I get from people that have come to classes of mine, but also from supervisees who are using these principles, is it just makes the work so much more accessible and useful for people, that I think it does make us stand out a little bit. Now, Valerie's got something to say here. She's unmuted herself.
Oh, no, I was just waiting.
Oh.
Just waiting. I'll go back.
No, you can start. Be nice to hear your thoughts. Just unmute yourself again, Valerie. There you go.
Yes. I was thinking about that today because I looked at the question, and I think I have more fun because I know how structured I am and how important structure is. And I think this has helped me find a way to be more flexible, to to have that structure less rigid. So it's still, I can't imagine myself going into a yoga class without a plan. And I can't imagine myself going into a yoga class without having practiced for weeks to make sure I got it right. That said, I really, maybe it's because I've just had a month off. I really noticed today how much softer I felt in myself and how I felt I presented in a much more fluid and flexible. And I listened again to David Emerson, and I made a couple of notes about that. And I quite like offering people choice, which if you told me that 6 months ago, I would have said, in your dreams. So, and it's really nice to see how they work with that choice. And they're reflecting things back to me that I would never have imagined, you know, how do you wave your arms around? I would never have done it that way. So it's such a lovely way to grow and learn. So yeah, it's been really important, Shirley. I think it's shifted. Maybe it's also got a bit to do with the time I've been teaching, and I feel more settled in myself, or, you know, not a fraud anymore. That I can rest in that, and that is almost a permission to be a bit more flexible in how I teach, and then trying that out and seeing how people respond. And losing perfection.
Yes.
A connection to perfection. I think I certainly have it for myself. And I think I projected that a bit, and all that's changed significantly. So,
and it's lovely to hear that, Valerie, because I think that's what I might have noticed when you came on tonight, and I saw you looking very glowing. Like there was a softness in your face and a settling in you that I hadn't noticed before.
okay.
So, you know, there's something that has shifted there. Like what you're sharing with me reminds me of a story. I was listening to a woman called Sharon Salzberg, who's a meditation teacher in the Buddhist lineage, and she's talking about how she was always frightened about giving a talk. She didn't want to get it wrong. And she one day went to a workshop where the Dalai Lama was talking, and he had an interpreter, and the Dalai Lama said something and the interpreter says something, and the interpreter said, no, that's not right. You didn't say that. And he said, yes, I did. And he said, no, you didn't. And so the Dalai Lama went back and checked. He said, oh, you're right. I didn't say that. And he just burst out laughing. It was like this lovely full belly laugh. Like, I got it wrong, and it's okay. It's okay. You know, it's like the allowance for the imperfection is really human. And we all relate to that. Yeah. Wonderful. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Thank you. Others? Don't forget to unmute, Jen.
Unmute. There we go. Oh, I'm happy to hear other people's
Oh,
stories.
sorry. I thought you were talking. I thought I saw your lips moving.
I was talking to myself going, yes, I can relate to it.
Okay. Sorry, well, you can go back on mute then. I'll make this the big screen so I can see everyone's lips a bit more closely.
Yeah. Well, now that I'm
yeah.
unmuted, what I can say is that exactly what you just said. It's okay to be incorrect sometimes and make mistakes. My fear about doing PTSD yoga teaching was I would really muck it up. I'd use the wrong language, or I'd, you know, I wouldn't be practicing the way I should have been to be in that role. But I have been bringing a lot of what we've talked about into my classes over the last 6 months, so I'm feeling more confident with it. I like the idea after watching David Emerson chat and reading a bit more. I like the idea of actually using all these skills in a regular class rather than being specific. But I also feel there is such a strong need for support for people suffering with trauma. I'd like to think I can feel confident enough to go into if the opportunity arose. So I've gained a lot from it, definitely. Yeah.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. It's been lovely having you. It's been lovely having you all in the group. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Nell's unmuting. I'm not sure. There we go.
You know, the more I think about how I teach, it's very trauma sensitive. It's just become, particularly the year I've had quite a hard year myself, recovering from my own sort of situation, and I have had a beautiful group of writers to teach regularly, and they've allowed me to grow as a teacher and to become, I think, more of a trauma sensitive teacher actually. And there's lots of space to choose, and I think what I love is it just gives you such insight actually around the students. You see how they are by the choices they make, and you can then adjust your class according to whoever's maybe not coping so well. And so, yeah, I think it's an absolute gift as a yoga teacher to have these skills. And yeah, I'm just always amazed with just that body awareness and how wise the body is. Yeah, I'm often trying to go off in these other koshas and being brought back to, like, you know, the body's pretty good level to be focused on and to stay with. Yeah, so thank you. It's been really wonderful to have this quality time with you. Very special.
Thank you, Nell. It's been lovely having your gentle nature here in the group and all your wisdom. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure to be a part of the group. Thank you.
Shall I?
Go for it.
I'm just watching Roxy's hands there to see if we can talk at the same time.
We're all body scanning. We're all
I know.
tracking.
It's hard on Zoom, isn't it? I feel like that the courses has, just when we talk about body, filling out the body map, this is it's filled out the rationale, I guess the knowledge of why I'm doing what I'm doing, in terms of some of the really specifics, but also the more general, but also the more specific. So like just tonight around the spatial orientation, because despite what I've been reading and learning, that's actually never been really made that explicit to me around the eye tracking. And it's like, wow, yeah, that's actually, and yet I might be doing it, but I guess it's about that doing it with intent and more consciousness. So
Yes.
A lot of what
Yes.
I've been taking from this course, and I mean, I teach trauma sensitive yoga, but I also teach restorative yoga and yoga nidra in studios and resilience workshops and things. And I will always teach in a trauma informed way. And it's, I guess, there's a lot of people that push back on it, like at yoga teachers, like I'll get told by other teachers, oh, you're giving far too much permission, and people feel really unsafe because there's too much choice. And I guess something like this will give the ground to go, actually, no, this is how I want to teach, and this is the right way for me to teach, because I think because it can be different and there can be a bit of pushback out there. So I think it's places like this where we can kind of go, actually, no, this is right for me. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you for your commitment, given you're 2 hours ahead of us. And now it's probably 10:30.
I just couldn't do it last week. It was like, oh my God.
That's great commitment.
Middle of winter.
Oh, fantastic. It's lovely having you across the ditch. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Oh, Roxy. Beautiful Roxy. There we go.
The course, I've really enjoyed doing the course, and with my recent teacher trainings. It is really interesting to hear perspectives, and that you must tell the student to do this, otherwise they don't know what they're going to do. But I know personally, when I'm in those classes, I feel cranky and I don't go back to the teacher at all. And just with students, it's important to give that choice as well, and you know, for them to bring that awareness into their body. And I just didn't realize how much there is to it as well. And you don't realize what you are developing, and you won't tell students that, but you're able to weave in these principles into classes. So that's been really awesome for me, and it's vast as well. The knowledge is so big. Yeah, it's awesome.
Lovely. And Roxy, it's been lovely having your lovely new yoga teacher energy. It's been beautiful having it in the group, and seeing you, you know, working with the principals and getting in and starting classes and stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, really great to be here and with you all.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. It's been delightful. And Bianca, who's not here, but I just want to acknowledge her as part of the group as well. And all of you, it's been lovely spending these 6 months with you all. And keep in touch. Let me know how things go. And keep doing the brilliant work you do. I feel like, in a way, all these wonderful yoga teachers, they're a little bit of unsung heroes out there doing fantastic work. And people think the yoga teachers, you know, doing weird and wonderful things, but we're really doing amazing work. So it's wonderful to be with you all and be part of this great group called Yoga Teachers. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Shirley. Thanks so much for all you guys.
It's been
Thanks
lovely.
so much.
So I'll send the recording out tomorrow with some extra little links, and then you'll get a little attendance certificate of this for your PD as well. So I'll send those out in a week or so.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay well.
Very well.